Okay. So we are about to go live. And then sometimes it actually does go live before it starts. But yes, so definitely want to welcome you guys to another edition of, well, this is probably our first one on New Jack Swing podcast. And it's myself and Sheldon Taylor. How you guys doing?
Doing good.
Yeah, okay. So we've so today, one of the things that we wanted to really focus on is the one of my favorite albums. I think is the 1987 Keith Sweat debut album, Make It Last Forever. One of the things that I definitely love about the album is this. It's strange. It's just um, 8 songs, less than 50 minutes long. And it just seems so rare because when we got into the 90s, people were having 8 to 16 tracks and stuff like that. But this reminds me of how, they did Thriller, just 8 songs and let's make sure we get the best. Even, just got paid, couldn't even make the album just because, like, look, we just don't have any room. But later on, I want to be able to go through our top 5 songs. There's 3 that are not going to make it. But yeah, Shannon, what are your thoughts on Make It Last Forever?
That's a good preface that you provided pertaining to the album when you talked about there were 8 songs compared to 90s records and records that are made later or CDs and whatnot, where they were like 15, 16, 20 songs. And the best way to look at that is I would say Make It Last Forever is an example of it's quality over quantity. That's the best way to put it, because back then CDs were just coming into production. They started to come in production right around 1985, 1986, but people were still buying albums and cassettes. And
Yeah.
obviously, when you're dealing with vinyl, there's only so many songs that you can put on a vinyl record without turning it into a double album.
Okay.
When you look at Make It Last Forever, even though it's the cornerstone, the jump off of New Jack Swing, as well as Keith's career, that album is made in the vein of records that were crafted in the 1980s. When you listen to Make It Last Forever, there are a lot of components to that album that are absent in the contemporary music that comes after it. You hear distinctive intros on
Yeah.
each song. Well, first of all, Make It Last Forever is song driven. Each song has its distinct identity. It stands on its own. And like I just said briefly,
Yeah.
there are distinct intros. There are extended breakdowns. The songs have a tendency that they're able to breathe.
Yeah.
When you look at later production, everything is drum loops and samples. They're loops, so the songs don't are not necessarily fleshed out. And when you listen to Make It Last Forever, the songs breathe, like I said. But compared to records that are made now or coming after Make It Last Forever, it's like whoever's producing those records, they are a little bit afraid of what you would call dead space. When you listen to radio,
Yeah.
everything is constantly interaction. There's no dead space. You either got commercials, you got music, you got the DJ talking. Well, if you could look at the contemporary productions coming out late 80s, early 90s, you hear people talking in the beginning of the record. Just a lot of ad-libs and whatnot. And it's almost a way of kind of filling um, empty spaces of the music, because again, younger producers are hearing the music a little bit differently. But back at the time when Make It Last Forever was made, it was made in the vein of R&B records that were lush. Again, they had extended intros, they had breakdowns. The music would come in, it may have reach a certain tempo, a certain dramatic elevation. It would come down, and the record would just phase out. you
Yeah.
know. And when you look at Keith Sweat's Make It Last Forever, it's kind of one of the final R&B albums that are made in that vein. There are a few more that are created by mature artists, but by the time definitely 89, 90 rolls around, the production component kind of changes. So even though Teddy is making a lot of these beats in his house in the projects, you hear that record, and even though the sound is much leaner than the R&B records that are coming out before it, you still can hear ingredients of what's out at the time. So when you ever listen to Alexander O'Neal's Hearsay, which dropped in 87, which made him
Mm.
the only black artist to sell out the Hammersmith Odeon 7 consecutive nights.
Wow.
Alexander O'Neal's a big star. He was a big star in England. You
Yeah,
listen
yeah.
to Freddie Jackson's album, Just Like the First Time. It puts him on track to be one of the first artists to have like 7 consecutive number one singles. You
Wow.
listen to Just Like the First Time, and you hear the songs, you hear the consistency. Each song has its own identity, but the production is still unified. And then you listen to Luther Vandross records, Give Me the Reason, The Night I Fell in Love. These records dropped in 1985, 1986. You know, these 4 albums really made Luther Vandross, Alexander O'Neal, Freddie Jackson. They were like R&B kings. Of course, they were a little bit older than Keith, so
Yeah.
their approach to music was a little bit different. But Keith's music comes out of that same vein. So even though he's going toward a younger sound, it's still created in the vein of the records that are coming out in the 80s.
But then during the time when those three were coming out, who were the kids or the, when you think of what New Jack Swing brought out, what were they listening to then? Before hip hop and sort of Make It Like Guy and new and stuff. What were they listening to?
Okay.
What were
Well,
people listening to? Yeah.
I was a youth in that area. Again, I was
Mm.
born in 1968. So when these records are coming out, Alexander O'Neal, Freddie Jackson, Luther Vandross, I'm 16, 17 years old. So what we're listening to is we're listening to everything that's on the radio, because there aren't any young artists, with the exception of a New Edition. They're prominent, but really the mature adult R&B artists are the ones who are dominating. There are no young artists, and we're either listening to that, whether we're hearing it in our parents' record collections, we're hearing it on the radio, we're watching Soul Train, or we're listening to rap music. So there is no R&B immediate component until later, until you start seeing Guy and everybody else who's coming after.
Wow.
So there are no young artists. Just like it's infested with young artists after, going into 90, 89, 90.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just change.
But
Yeah.
R&B is an adult affair. But keep in mind, you know, an R&B artist like a Freddie Jackson, Luther Vandross, Alexander O'Neal, these people are, at the time 86, 87 rolls around, they're 34, 35, 36 years old. So when you're 34, 35, 36 years old in the 80s, it's different from being 34, 35, 36 years old now, because it's almost like it kind of skew young, because youth culture is pretty dominant. So it's almost as if a person that's 34, 35, 36, they could be 21. When you hear the music, you see the look. But back then, they were grown men. They were grown men back then. So anybody that was 21, you know, early 80s, 70s, or whatever, you were a full-fledged grown man. These people had kids, they raised families and all of that. So it was totally different than how everything was skewed young, 88, 89, 90, as it starts to go on beyond that. So it's a mature approach. So when I look at those albums and the music that encapsulates that period,
Mm.
I call it Champagne and Roses R&B, where Keith Sweat comes on. He rocks the Boulevard and the Boudoir, the Boulevard and the Bedroom, because the beats are harder, The sound is leaner. It's kind of more aggressive, even though it's still made in the same vein of what's coming out before.
So, I mean, I listened to Babyface and even L.A. Reid on Questlove, and they said that when that I Wanna came out, that Babyface, and he said it in other interviews that he just like, wow, he thought that they'd done that, that what that song almost felt like, as if we need to reinvent ourselves because this was just something they've never heard before. And they got in touch with Jimmy and Terry, like, who's this Teddy kid, the producer, who's this person? Because it's almost as if Teddy came out from nowhere with the Keith Sweat stuff, and they wanted to see who's this guy who's just come out with something new and something different. And I do wonder, because the way Teddy tells it is as if he was done with R&B, he wanted to focus on hip hop, and he got begged into doing R&B, but he did something that sort of got all the established producers to take notes. And you listen to the song, it doesn't seem to fit the Make It Last Forever. It doesn't seem to fit into the 80s genre. It feels more late 80s, but when you think of 87 and I Wanna, it just seems so innovative. When we listen to Timbaland and the Neptunes doing stuff, and like, wow, this is different, this beat. That's how it looked like back then. It just felt like no one was doing this. It felt like there was a groove and it was just fun and funky. People talk about Janet's Control album, but I think it was that the Control album was heavily influenced by, Prince and the Times and that Minnesota sound, which I personally didn't like as much, that type of stuff. So it was completely different to what Teddy and I Want to do. Can you remember when I Wanna came out on the radio? What was your initial thoughts?
It was different. Everything that you're saying is definitely on point because everything before it. First of all, you got to look at numbers. And Teddy is anywhere from 12 to 15 years younger than Jam and Lewis, LA and Babyface. So that makes a lot of difference because Teddy is a child of rap music. And like anyone else, R&B music is also on his radar because he talks about playing in bands, but he's a person that grows up in New York. And yeah, you're hearing R&B records and things, but he's coming up in rap music. There's an interview that Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis did about New Jack Swing, and they always say that Control, in a way, was the first New Jack Swing record in terms of the heavy beats that they were doing. But they said the only difference, and then there's another record that came out by a producer by Levert. It was called Casanova.
Yeah.
And that record came out in 87. So these two records, sometimes people kind of point as early versions of New Jack Swing, but Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were saying that we kind of were ahead of the curve because Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, their productions feature the 808 drum machine. If you go back and listen to a lot of productions they did with SOS Band and everyone else, they were using the 808 drum machine. Prior to that, you had the Oberheim DX7, you had the Linn drum sounds that's associated with a lot of Prince records and whatnot. They started using the 808 drum machine. And that 808 drum machine was very influential, and it kind of rerouted the sound of R&B in the mid 80s because a group from the UK, Loose Ends, would utilize that same 808 drum sound and little, I won't say friction, but when Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis first heard it, they were like, well, hey, these guys are utilizing our sound. But fast forward, they're looking at Teddy because this sound is the sound of the future, because they're wondering, how is it coming about? Because it's stripped down, it's lean, it's not a lot of excess. The sound is simple, but the groove is funky. But remember, LA and Babyface, they come out of a band situation, multi-instruments. They're playing instruments. How they're making music, their way of composing music is totally different from what everybody is doing after the fact in terms of crafting melody, the way they're writing songs. So it's not when we're making beats. We're literally working it out in the studio. Of course, one of your future interviews pertaining to a subject that you're going to talk about later, the person you said their name, he's affiliated with LA and Babyface. He can give you that insight. But those guys are making records in a different way. They're making records in a conventional way that music has always been created up until Make It Last Forever, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. So that sound is foreign to them because they're wondering how is it being made, and they would have never known that these records are made in the projects. So when I'm hearing the record, I'm hearing the rhythm. I'm like, this is like totally different because the Minneapolis sound is extremely, that's the dominating sound. It's extremely popular. But this record has a rhythm. It's lean, of course it swings, but it's leaner and it's different. So when I first heard it, I can tell something was coming around the corner. I didn't know what it was, but after listening to whatever the musical style or musical evolution that R&B was headed throughout the 80s, 87, this record was totally different. And I heard it alongside Kumo D's How You Like Me Now. So even rap music was kind of like changing too. So it was like, wow, this isn't something I was out 2, 3, 4, 5 years before. So really, when you look at Make It Last Forever, it symbolizes a young person's approach to music. So when you look at that, and for Keith to be, because he's older than Teddy, he's just, at least 5 or 6 years older than Teddy.
Yeah.
And Keith comes out of the 70s and 80s vibe of music. He's born in somewhere around the 60s, but he's a teenager in the 70s. So he's growing up around the golden age of soul music, Blue Magic, the Delphonics, the OJs, the Ozzy Brothers, and all of that is in his DNA. So that's driving that. That's why when you listen to Make It Last Forever, we're going to talk about those songs, that it's in the vein of that. So it's a combination of old and new, but it starts with the sonics. It starts with the sound. So the difference between what Teddy was doing and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and all the rest of those guys, it was just a different mental approach because they looked at it somewhat as a style. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis always said that we made a similar record with Control, but the only thing that we did is we did it in that style, and we did it, and then we moved on to something else, while Teddy stayed with that sound. But again, these guys are musicians. They play all types of instruments, and they're coming out of bands. Of course, Teddy comes out of a band, but he's much younger. So their thing is, we're doing a style, we're dealing with the sound, and we move on to the next record. That's why when you listen to Janet Jackson's records, each record doesn't sound the same.
Yeah,
it's a different vibe with each record. So it's just the creative approach that the older producers are following or utilizing compared to what Teddy's doing. So it's a lean record.
Yeah. I mean,
and it's also go ahead.
No, I wanted to just even start off with like going through the tracks, because a lot of people might look, as we said, it was just 8 songs. And I think one of my favorite songs on it is Something Just Ain't Right. And it's probably the intro that really gets me, and I've heard Teddy say that he had to, because his fingers couldn't reach, he had to get a long keyboard and just to scale it all the way down. But for me, that's just you get to see an album, whether it's tape or record, and you start off with an intro with the keyboard, the keys just going in like that, and it is almost like borrowing from some James Brown, that type of funky type of, let's get a bit of James Brown, let's just get a bit of Parliament, and let's just make it bang in the club, as opposed to what might have been out there before. So what are your thoughts about Something Just Ain't Right?
Well, something just ain't right, and we're on the same path because I was listening to the album before we got on today, and it's in the same vein. When you listen to something ain't right, we start to see he kicks off with the shimmery keyboard riff that kicks off the record. But when you look at great records,
Mm.
they always have a unique intro so that you know it when you first hear it. And so when you look at Make It Last Forever, the fact that you're kicking off with something just ain't right, you got the keyboard riff or whatever, and it just goes on. That's how you're supposed to do it. You put out the first song and it catches you. You
Mm.
know, if you look at a lot of contemporary productions, it's just got the beat, it loops, but you got the riffs that kick off. And then before Keith even starts singing, you know, there's a few bars where the music is playing. You hear the keyboard work, and
Mm.
then he jumps in. So, but when you look in terms of Black music, um, post 1989, post 1990, um, that's how Black music was. You know, up tempo Black music, they had great bass lines, they had great rhythms, they had unique sounds that kicked the record off because, again, radio was the main component, the
Mm.
media component to display your record, to showcase your record. So you had to have sounds that separated from whatever else was out there. So it's great how they kicked the record off because it the record it lets you know what's about to happen, and it catches your ear, and the rhythms are there, and then Keith Sweat goes into the first lyric, and he's saying, "Tossing, turning, girl, just can't sleep at night. Ooh, you've been cheating on me," and that's basically that's the synopsis of the song. So he's giving you the whole song right there, and then the storytelling is there. So unlike contemporary records, that's a lost art.
Mm.
They just write to the track and they just sing along with it or whatever. But Keith Sweat, the lyrics, they jump right in at you, and it's
Yeah.
something that you can really catch. It's catchy. You can hold on to it. And back then, that's what R&B records were about. Like now, we talk about stuff is we trying to monetize it and blow it up and all that. But the biggest thing was coming out with great music and music that could identify with the person who was listening to it. So that's why, that song really resonates. The album resonates with people.
Yeah.
So
And so
yeah.
the second one was Right in the Wrong Way. And I didn't realize that that was Tammy Lucas said that she sang background on that, but unfortunately she was not credited. Um, she's not credited being on it, but she said that she was the female background vocalist on that track. And that's another one of my favorite, even though it's the second track in there. Um, because it didn't feel like, I don't know if it's it didn't there was I don't believe there was any elements of sampling in that, but it was when this is Keith, first showcasing his ability to sing a slow song, but telling a story. You you're not a little girl anymore. I mean, it was, you could hear what he's singing about. I mean, this is what we have our grief with R&B now, and even in the 90s, where you can barely make out what the story is. But when you listen to Right and Wrong Way, it's almost like it's like a poem, but very clear and distinctive. So you know what has been said, and you got the people at the background joining in, almost like yes, and like almost like a play, almost like you're
Mm-hmm.
listening to a Shakespeare play, and you have those who are supposed to be in agreement with you with the background singers. What's your thought on Right and the Wrong Way?
Another great song, continues the excellent sequencing on the album. Right in the Wrong Way, like you said, it's very vivid, very visual. It's like a poem, but obviously the storyline is that um, the woman that he's with, it's now they're about to their relationship's about to go to the next level.
Mm.
And at this point right now, he's painting a picture, and she's a young lady, but now it's about the time to go to the next level in their relationship. and he's kind of painting that. It's very seductive.
Mm.
The music, the sound, the storyline, his performance is very, very seductive, and but it's at the same time it's romantic it's
Yeah.
romantic at the same time, and the background vocals are a major component to that record because prior to the records that are coming out in the 90s, background vocals were critical. They were critical component to records.
Mm.
Background singing was a major art. There were people who made their living doing background vocals, and they made an excellent living out of it. Because back then, music was made in the studio. It wasn't really quick. They didn't make it in their bedroom. Music was made in the studio, and background singers worked out the background arrangements. That was a key element to the music. Of course, you had to know how to be able to sing on key, and it wasn't about overshadowing the artist, but it was about giving that record a lot of flavor. And it complemented right in the wrong way because Keith is singing and you got everyone else the call and response. So when you hear that call and response, they're backing him up. That's an R&B tradition. It goes back to call and response back in the slavery time where they would sing and the people would sing and follow along with them. So the whole gospel call and response. So you see elements of traditional R&B components in that record, and they're backing him up, and he's singing the lyrics. And of course, I saw an interview now is that type of record would kind of be skewed in a different way now in the Me Too era because it's almost like older man, younger woman. But back then, people weren't thinking like that. It was just that, okay, it's time to go ahead and go to the next level. You're not a little girl. You're my woman. And then at the end, when he says, you're a big girl now, no more daddy's little girl, what he's doing, he's making a reference to a stylistics record that came out in 1968, 1969, their very first record. Is called You're a Big Girl Now. And the hook is, you're a big girl now. You're not a little girl. No more daddy's little girl. So basically he's bringing that back. He's dropping into his records. Remember I told you earlier, Keith Sweat is coming up in the 70s where the high falsetto singers, the stand-up groups, the Blue Magic stylistics, he drops that in there. Wow. So it's like a nod to the past. So it's really almost an update of You're a Big Girl Now. So when you go back and listen to the stylistics, You're a Big Girl Now, the lyrics are kind of the same. And it's not necessarily sexual, but what he's talking about, no more pigtails in your hair. No more dolls for you to play with. That type of thing like that. And it's kind of almost an update of that record. So you got to listen to that stylistic record and you'll kind of get an idea where I'm coming from.
Okay. Next one was Tell Me It's Me You Want. I think the production actually has a big say in this, just hearing, because when you look at the credits of the CD, it has Teddy as the programming, keyboards and drumming and drums. So you can tell that he's playing his keyboards throughout that particular track. And one thing Teddy kept saying, he's not really, even though he plays the keyboard, he's not a piano, he's not like a Jimmy Jam of a piano player, but he does, but he seems to be funky on the keyboards, even though he doesn't give himself credit to be a great musician. But in that you could tell.
Well, what he's saying is that he's not a musician or a keyboardist in the traditional sense of maybe a Duke Ellington, a Stevie Wonder. He plays enough. He understands drum programming and everything else, but he's musical enough to where the songs are interesting and the songs really stand apart from what's happening with the other New Jack Swing records that are competing or that are along the same lines of what he's doing. Everybody's kind of copying him. The keyboards give his music a lot of warmth. If you listen to some of the records he did with outside productions, You listen to some of the keyboard riffs. It has a warm sound, and people kind of copy that. So when you listen to a high five record, she's playing hard to get, and you hear those keyboard riffs and the harmonizing, that's straight out of the Teddy Riley arrangement songbook. So when you listen to that, Tell Me It's Me You Want, it's very warm. You hear the keyboard riff is there, and then it comes in, and then you hear the drum patterns and whatnot, and it's great because it's not over the top.
Yeah.
It's just basic, but what happens is it gives Keith, the platform to go ahead and do his thing. It's a great record.
Yeah.
It's almost an example where it's less is more.
Yeah. That's
very restrained. Very restrained.
And then we go to the big one, which is I Want Her. And when you compare it with all Teddy's sort of New Jack tracks, whether it's Groove Me or My Prerogative, or Just Got Paid, My Prerogative seems to always come up first, trumps. But I Want is one of the first times I think the first time we ever heard Teddy say yep, yep. And we with the first time, and I don't know, I don't have this knowledge, but it's one of the first times I noticed a producer in the background talking. So now, we've got producers nowadays, but Timbaland, Pharrell, Rodney, Darkchild, you'd hear them, even Jermaine Dupri, you'd hear them at the back, on the records, like, talking or and stuff. But this is the first time, 87, where I couldn't think of a producer throughout the whole stuff. Yeah, just chanting and talking and adding it in there. And I don't know if people noticed or said anything about the fact that, wait, who's this kid? Who's this guy talking throughout the track and it almost be co-singing, featuring on the record?
When you look at that, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were doing that before.
Oh,
I'm gonna send you some records. I'm gonna send you some records offline, and you will see. They were kind of like early guys doing that because their production was animated. First of all, they came out at the time, the group, and the whole visual component. I mean, they were huge. They were almost, when you look at like producers in the forefront, but I mean forefront in the music videos and all of that, they were doing that.
Oh.
3-4 years before Teddy. If you see Janet Jackson doing her videos, they're playing next to her, and one of the things that people knew who they were because they knew them from the time. So you see them, they got the suits and the hats and the sunglasses.
But were they singing? Were they vocals on the record?
They had background singers. They had background singers, specifically one. I forgot her name. Lisa Keith was one. They had a whole their own the equivalent of a GR situation. They had a whole flight time production of singers and songwriters and background singers. So they had their own in-house vibe.
But you wouldn't hear Terry or Jimmy on a record saying, "Come on, Janet," and
But they were doing their own, and I'm gonna not on the Janet record, but they were doing it on Alexander O'Neal's records. If you listen to the record. They might not be in the videos doing it, but on the records, they're laughing, they're joking. And I'm going to send you some records and you're going to see it. So they were kind of like before Teddy doing that, but I can understand where you're coming from because when you're hearing Teddy do that on I Wanna, it's strange because you got producers here and you got singers here, and they don't necessarily merge. Where you got them being out in the forefront as if they were an artist. But I think because one, he made the records, and it was, first of all, the record comes out on an independent label. He makes the records in his house, so it kind of breaks away. He's a young guy, so his hands are not tied by the whole conventional, traditional industry situation where, hey, this is how you're supposed to make a record. Because it's really him and Keith. They got some background singers, they got some other musicians or whatever. So, you come out and Keith has control over how to make the record. So I don't think it's some sort of grand scheme. I think it's just organic. It's not contrived, it's just organic. But what happens is, as time goes on, it's a signature because Now you're starting to see a shift of where the producer's starting to be out front. So their signature components that kind of establish him to let you know he's the guy that made the record. But during that time, there was no grand scheme of this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to conquer the music world. He's just in there working.
Yeah, because I mean, now we expect to hear Timbaland, doing that in every record he does, or Rodney would, I've listened to a number of his stuff with Dark Child and DC, what is with Destiny Child, he'll almost get him up. Will I Am will do the same thing. Wyclef, they would all talk in the middle of the record just to, I'm here, Jermaine Dupri would do it. But as I said,
But that's Teddy. What it is, and you got to give Teddy credit, is that because again, those guys are kind of young for everything else coming before. I'm not saying they don't hear it, they don't know about it, but Teddy is the main guy that influences cats as producers for them to be in the forefront. The ad-libs and all of that stuff. That's clearly out of his vein, but he's also an extension of something that happened before.
Okay.
And I can't say that he copied it, but it's just the simple fact that he's doing what he's doing during that time. So that's why when you listen to LA and Babyface and Jimmy and Terry, they're hearing the music and they're hearing what it is, and it's totally different.
Yeah. Then we track number 5 is the I think the biggest song on the album, which is "Make It Last Forever" with Jackie McGee, and it's I don't know. I mean, so if you think back to that time and what type of impact did this song do? Was it different than what was out there? And what made this song "Make It Last Forever" different than what was out there for it to be such a classic, enduring hit?
Well, the song itself, the music obviously was great. The lyrics were superior because it captured the dynamic between Keith and Jackie. But when you look at them as a duet, they come in the tradition of R&B duets. Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell, Rick James and Tina Marie. So it's not foreign to listeners when they hear it because we're used to R&B duets. But I love how Jackie sang the record. Her performance was great because it wasn't like a back and forth situation. It was very seamless. How they did the record, how she sang on the record, because Keith is singing, she's singing, but the lyrics are perfect because it captured the dynamic and the chemistry. They had excellent chemistry together.
Yeah.
And it's a cornerstone of the record. I credit Keith because he continues the tradition of the male-female duet. When you look at that Make It Last Forever album, you've got up-tempos, you got ballads, it's funky, you've got duets, and it's all on one album. And that was common for 80s and 70s R&B records and whatnot. But the great thing is that he got an unknown artist. But at that time, he was kind of unknown himself.
Yeah.
So you got two unknowns on the record, and the chemistry is great. Beautiful, beautiful song. The lyrics. You listen to the record, it has this nice thump, this nice groove to it. The remix is great. Excellent record, but it captures the chemistry between them and lyrics. Lyrics, I think, are the centerpiece of that record because when he's singing to her.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So if you are a female listening to that record, you can envision a man speaking to you like that. If you're a male listening to the record, you can envision what you would say to another person. The record is extremely romantic as well.
The track number 6 is "In the Rain," and this is the first one that Keith didn't write. Somebody called Tony Hester was credited as the writer, but it was one of the first times we get to really fully hear Teddy on the vocoder, which he really just took. I'm trying to remember, did he do it voice coder on the Guy album? I don't think I heard him on the Guy album.
There's elements. It might be a vocoder on the Guy album, but that's the first time you hear
Yeah.
him actually do it. Because keep in mind, before him was Roger Troutman, and Roger Troutman and Zapp, he did a
Yeah.
record called Computer Love,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he's doing the vocoder. That's the first time you hear vocoder on an R&B record that's on the black side. Now before that, there was like a mid-tempo balladish rock record by a British rock performer named Peter Frampton. And
Okay.
he would actually use the vocoder. This is back in 77. But you saw the vocoder popping up on certain records in the mid 80s after Roger was coming. Roger and Zapp was doing it, or
Mm.
Wind and Fire was doing it. So it was, when you look at this vocoder on a ballad, you know, that's a Roger Troutman brainchild right there
Okay.
on the black side, on the R&B side. So, you know, Teddy is kind of, you know, bringing that Roger element to it. But I have to let you know that In the Rain is a remake.
Oh, that's
It's a
why.
remake to the Dramatics record that came out roughly around 1971, 72, 73. It was called In the Rain.
Okay.
And I have to send you that song. So again, remember, Keith is a teenager during
Mm.
all of these soulful records by these stand-up R&B groups that are coming out. So In the Rain is him once again taking something old, dropping it into the new thing that he's doing. So when he's doing it, you hear the thunderstorms and the rain in
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
background. The original version of The Rain kicks off with a thunderstorm in the beginning. So doing it keeps doing a remake. But once again, he's dropping the old into the new. Now at the time when that record had come out, or when I first heard the album, I was about 17, 18 or 18, and I didn't realize I had heard The Rain, remember
Mm.
The Rain, but I didn't realize it was a remake, you know, for a couple of years. And I was like, oh wow. But you gotta hear that song so you can kind of see the similarity. So he's dropping a remake. So that's what makes Make It Last Forever so unique, so great, because you have all of these components of what was out before, and it's all wrapped up into a new sound.
Mm. And then we get into track 7, which is How Deep Is Your Love? And Teddy then continues to use the vocoder in that
Mm-hmm.
as well. Actually, almost like his own version of Computer Love, because it
Yes,
is.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
What are your thoughts of that one?
Again, you know, there's a lot of simplicity going on with those songs. It's not a lot of overkill. There's no horns, you know, even the background vocals with some of
Mm.
these records, it's very restrained, even though the background vocals are high in the mix, something that's kind of disappears with future contemporary R&B of the 90s, but it's the simplicity of it.
Yeah.
It really stands out. So it's just, you know, Keith and Teddy doing this thing or whatever, but it's a great showcase for Keith vocally and lyrically.
Mm.
And of course, he's singing these songs in the first person. And when you're writing song lyrics and you're doing them in the first person, it has the ability to transport um, someone who's listening to the record. It transports them into the song. So he
Mm.
says, "Been all day thinking, all night wondering why love has to change. You kiss me, but it's not real." So that's like a conversation, you know. So and that's one of the things that he's able to do. If you listen to the whole album, he's able to encapsulate himself into these different situations. So one, he's pursuing a woman, I wanna, and he's a victim of heartbreak and cheating, all the whole dimensions of romance, you know, and that's very important. And that gives that record, that album, staying power.
Yeah.
That a lot of records, they kind of fall through the cracks, and they were great for their time, but you know, but it has the ability to conjure up emotions that people may have had when they first heard the record. You can dance to the record,
Yeah.
you know, you can be with your lady with the record, and you can just play it straight through. And then you said 8 songs.
8 song. Yeah. Less
The
than 50
albums
minutes. Yeah.
that had right, the albums with the least amount of songs that you can play it, and before you know it, you can't believe it's over.
Yeah.
Think about Anita Baker's Rapture, same situation, 8 records. You know, the Michael Jackson Thriller. So when you look at making these songs, these albums, it's about making the strongest songs. Because with Make It Last Forever, they made almost 20 records for the album, 20 tracks for the album, you know. But these 8 were the ones that made it on the album.
Wow.
So it's really a lesson in quality over quantity, because you don't have to have a lot of outtakes, a lot of lost songs, because sometimes, yeah, we want to hear those lost tracks and what they sounded like, but sometimes it's a reason why they didn't make it on the album. They might not have been as good. They're great to hear, but the finished product that we see is great.
Yeah, I mean, the last one on the album is "Don't Stop Your Love," and you know, this is maybe a little bit more 80s stuff. I know Teddy didn't. He's not listed as a producer, but he's listed as doing keyboards and some drum programming on that. But it is one of my favorite ones on there as well, though. What are your thoughts about that?
Because it's funky, it's a groove. Once again, he's just in the vein of doing whatever, you know, doing the style of music that's out in the 80s. It's just a groove, it's an anthem or whatever that is, and you're hearing the unique sounds of the time that are in the record. You're hearing the keyboard. It's just a groove. You know, it's funky. And that's basically, when you look at albums back then, it wasn't like a grand marketing scheme. I'm going to pull this, I'm going to do this. You just do what feels good. You know, that record is extremely organic. You know, a lot of records coming after that up until now, sometimes they can be kind of contrived, because everything is more, I don't say it's more structured, but it's more contrived. People have a master plan of what they want to do. I want to put this on here, put this on here, get this guest, you know. But back then it was extremely organic. Even when you listen to him and Jackie McGee, very organic.
Yeah.
Because she's in the record, but she's not all over the record. She's in certain pockets of the record. It's great.
I wish, you know, if anyone, an interview that I wish you guys can, if I had to recommend one, is Tammy Lucas, because she talks about growing up in Harlem and when she and Teddy connected, just going over to his place in St. Nick's projects and just being around there. And then it's like, okay, we're recording this, and just singing. And it wasn't, and it's like go to the studio singing, and that's how they were just all together creating history without thinking much of it. But you know, one of the things that we definitely do want to be able to have to give credit to, because Teddy talks about he you know, in those early days he wrote the music, well, and Keith was the you know, most of the people wrote the lyrics. But to give credit to Keith Sweat, I don't think, because when we think of Make It Last Forever, there's a lot of credit goes to Teddy for the production and the music. And not enough is being said. I mean, you did it well today, is about the lyrics, how the lyrics told a story. But that was all Keith Sweat. And I don't know if people respect Keith Sweat as an influential lyricist, as a songwriter. I don't know if he gets that kind of credit. Because I up till today, I probably didn't really give him that credit and recognition as a songwriter.
Well, I'll tell you this. Again, Keith is a little older, and he comes up in a different time in music. So what Keith is doing, Keith is importing all of the ingredients in classic R&B, and he's dropping it into his music, but the music is still contemporary. So he's bringing romance. So if you look at everything that he's doing, Make It Last Forever sets the tone for what he does with every single album. So even though there's, you know, there's a lot of sexiness going on, but he has created a tradition of bringing in unknown female singers. He has a lot of well-known collaborators on his record, special guests. But if you notice, a lot of his songs, when he's doing Nobody and Twisted and One on One and all these records he's doing later, these are female singers that no one's ever heard of. So he knows how to create the tension. I'll send some of those records to you offline, but he brings the tradition of what was in the past and he imports it in the record. So when you're listening to I Give All My Love to You, like I said, One on One, and you can catch the vibe. The romance is still there. You can see the synergy and the passion of Rick James and Tina Marie on his female duets. He keeps the groove. Keith Sweat has a voice that's similar to a lead singer of a guy named Slave. It was a funk band that was popular in the 70s and early 80s. It's like a nasal baritone. He has a unique baritone when he's singing, and the songs have that groove, in a pocket groove. And that's consistent with a lot of his records. And Just a Touch of Love on the Keith Sweat album was made by Slave and Steve Arrington. So that's a remake. So Keith is really good. I think he's the vision for the album. Obviously, Make It Last Forever. Lyrically, it's romantic, it's funky, and all these different type of things. So at this point, Teddy is not the super producer at the time, but he's the one that's able to musically facilitate Keith Sweat's idea, because Keith Sweat is like, yeah, I want these beats from you, because he knows Keith Sweat is old enough to be steeped in the past, but he's young enough to see what's around the corner. That's the best way to go ahead and kind of explain that.
Yeah.
And he stays on that. But if you look at him, he stays consistent with contemporary sounds, but he always keeps that traditional R&B component in it. You know, with later and later albums, his songwriting is kind of skewed to more of the contemporary side, the way they create music. But there's still the romance in there. There's still the funk that's in there, and all of those ingredients make It Last Forever what it is. And you know that on the producer side, we're conditioned to pulling out a singular person. It's always been that way. We look at Michael Jackson, but without Quincy to kind of facilitate that vision and do everything behind the scenes. Same with Prince, without his cadre of musicians to be able to go ahead and reproduce those songs on stage. It's always a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes credit is lost. And sometimes we can overly be focused on credit and not realize, just soak in the music and appreciate it for what it is. But I like to just drop in Tammy Lucas, excellent songwriter, excellent singer. And her voice on those records, those Teddy Riley records, they really elevate the records.
Yeah.
You know, her songwriting, it's a very conversational type of songwriting. Her voice is very melodic, very easy on the ear. So when you hear her do the backgrounds, I like to say, when you look at Goodbye Love is almost like a Make It Last Forever, to where you see her in the record. She's not all over the record.
Yeah, very subtle.
She's just in certain pockets of the record or whatever, but her presence is felt.
Yeah.
So, you know, got to give her a lot of respect, because without her and people that we spoke of before, Bernard Bells, they kind of flesh out those productions. And they transform them from rhythm and beats to full-fledged songs as a result of their singing and songwriting contributions.
Okay. Well, we've got about a few minutes before we end up, but I just wanted to go through what my top 5 songs are.
Sure.
On Make It Last Forever. I mean, there's 8 songs, so it means 3 didn't really make the cut. But
okay.
I'll start with number 5 and Don't Stop Your Love. Number 4 was Make It Last Forever. Number 3 was Right in the Wrong Way. Number 2 is I Want Her. And for me, my favorite song on the album is Something Just Ain't Right. In fact, for a long time, that was my ringtone on my phone. I think it still is. Just that those are my top 5. What about yourself?
You got it. Those are my favorite 5. The other ones are great. Specifically the ballads that are like in the middle of the record. But I think my favorite record out of all of the songs on the album, Right in the Wrong Way, is probably number 1. Something Ain't Right, Just Ain't Right is number 2. I Want Her, the album version. Album version is great. So when you play it's about 6 minutes long, and it captures, it's elongated.
Yeah.
It really captures the groove and everything. So I Want It is 3. The Rain, and I love the fact that Don't Stop Your Love closes out the record. So the record closes out on the up-tempo vibe.
Yeah,
So it
that's that, and
starts
that
out
was
on the
unique.
in-tempo
Yeah,
vibe and
yeah.
it closes out. So when you look at a lot of components with music back then, sequencing was very important. All the details and things that we kind of overlook. We kind of know what it is sometimes, but we can't put our finger on it. But we know it feels good, it sounds good. All of those are major components that are kind of like a lost art in contemporary Black music sometimes, because it's about cramming all these songs on there, or we're trying to get all these guests. But I love the fact that the music frames Keith Sweat's musical identity perfectly. So no matter what else is going on, his identity is at the forefront. And that's why I referenced those other albums that I said before, because it kind of continues in that vein, because the mark of a great producer is to create music that frames that particular artist.
Yeah. Well, guys, I want to thank you for tuning in today, to another edition of our New Jack Swing podcast, which is really focusing on a lot of our New Jack Swing. Last week we did the Bobby album, and this week is the Make It Last Forever. So we'll be back, another classic New Jack Swing album. But I really want to thank Sheldon. I mean, can you give us the list that your website, where, because you've got a lot of amazing articles, so people can check that out. Although the link will be in the description, but you can just share it again.
Yes, please go to Sheldon Taylor's Souls of Black Notes at blogspot.com. A lot of great essays and articles and whatnot that kind of are in the vein of what we're talking about now, kind of immortalizes and frames that history. So, because as the time goes by, some of that stuff will be lost. We don't see a lot of books on this stuff. We don't see a lot of platforms that capture that. Sometimes the platforms are more on the salacious side, but Black music's greatest component is its cultural history and its relevance and its creativity. And all of the underside stuff is fun to hear, it's great to hear, but we also want to look at it within its context, because it has a longer effect. It's more greatly respected. Last story, the hook of the record makes the record strong. I remember being in Hawaii, listening to the Asian ladies sing the song. They couldn't sing all the rest of the songs. They didn't know the English, but when that came out, they loved it. They loved the groove, but the hook. And that's the great thing about records. When, you got great hooks, those songs last forever. But I remember seeing the Asian ladies sing this record. They couldn't sing the rest of the lyrics. But when it came to the hook, they was all over it.
Definitely. Yes, I still can't wait to get Keith Sweat on the show. He was supposed to have come the day I interviewed Dawn Robinson. It was the same night I was supposed to interview Keith Sweat, but I think it was like 3 a.m, and by the time I'd finished my interview, ready to interview him, his team says he's already gone to bed. I think it was So, and then since then we've been missing schedules, but he is aware of the channel. He wasn't too happy with Timmy Gatlin's assertion that over the making of Make You Sweat. So hence he wanted to give his side of the story, but we'll get a chance in due time. But guys, I want to thank you for watching stuff, and we will till next time. And this is me and Sheldon signing off. Take care.
Thank you, brother.